So UK has officially recognised Palestine as a state.
So today, to revive the hope of peace and a two-state solution, I state clearly, as Prime Minister of this great country, that the United Kingdom formally recognises the state of Palestine.
Is it a time to celebrate? Job done. It's a big blow to Israel and its expansionist Greater Israel agenda. On the one hand, such a declaration from the UK is a PR disaster, but on the other hand, it reminds me of the statement from Malcolm X.
No. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull a knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.
I want you to think here that the knife is Zionism, and the hand that originally wielded it, were the British and European powers. When you think of this analogy, it just best encapsulates what we're currently witnessing. So Britain, amongst other Western countries like Australia and Canada, have formally recognised Palestine as a state. So is this something that's going to create meaningful change on the ground? Even Keir Starmer's announcement recognises that the idea of the two-state solution is pretty much a dead or almost comatose idea anyway.
The hope of a two-state solution is fading. But we cannot let that light go out.
Fact remains that this was just simply done by Keir Starmer and Britain as a way to whitewash British crimes and complicity in the current genocide that we're seeing today. Is this meant to make us now forget about Starmer's agreeing to Israel's war crimes that he originally stated at the beginning of October 7th?
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation.
Are we meant to forget about Britain supplying weapons to Israel? Or are we meant to forget about Britain continuing to provide intelligence support to Israel? All the while, Israel is continuing to commit a genocide that's now been officially recognized by a United Nations body. And that makes things complicated for those who helped create the United Nations in the first place. I mean here Britain, who sit as a permanent member on the Security Council and who also still claim some sort of idea of a rule-based order for the international world. How do you claim any moral legitimacy in the face of the entire world opinion? Forget about the global south, whose opinion is clearly against Israel, but in Western populations, particularly amongst the young, they've all shifted their position against Israel and have more pro-Palestinian sentiments. So how can you then whitewash your support for a genocide, claiming some sort of moral superiority, moral high ground? Make a symbolic statement, one that won't be fulfilled, but gives Britain, European and other Western countries some semblance of moral legitimacy while still providing weapons, intelligence and political cover for Israel to commit a genocide. And this comes back to, and it reminds me of what Malcolm X said, the knife implemented in the backs of the Muslims was the establishment of Israel. And whose hand wielded that knife? It was Britain and other European powers. In fact, America was also, or played a very key role in 1948 in helping to establish or recognize this rogue entity. Why did they do that? Well, for two reasons. Firstly, this is best explained by Ilan Pappé.
When racism toward Jews reached its climax in the Holocaust, one moment after the end of the Second World War, not one European politician, not one European intellectual in West, Central and East Europe said to the Jews of Europe, come back to Europe. We will build together a Europe that is anti-racist, where Holocausts and any kind of racism towards other people would not happen. No, all the intellectuals of Western Europe, all the leaders of Europe came and said, we very much like an idea that we heard from Christian, evangelical Christianity and some Jewish intellectuals. Europe inherently cannot solve a Jewish problem. So we have a much better solution. We will build a Jewish state, a Western European Jewish state at the heart of the Arab world, at the heart of the Muslim world, at the expense of the Palestinians. And if you think that someone would come then whether it's 1882 or 1945, and say to people, wait a minute, that doesn't even sound logical. Forget about morality. Forget about international law. Forget about justice. How does this sentence sound logic to you, that because you have a problem of racism, you are helping to colonize an Arab country, to dispossess it and Judaize it in the name of solving a European problem of racism?
This idea of shipping Jews from Europe to another non-European land had been discussed by European powers for many years, many decades, even before the establishment of Israel in Palestine. For instance, there were other suggestions: Uganda, Madagascar, eastern edges of what was then USSR, or even Suriname. These were all options for creating this Zionist utopian society so that European powers could ship off their Jews to these countries. How does that even make any sense? As Ilan Pappé suggests, to solve the European racism problem in Europe, you expel those groups you are racist against by colonizing another people's lands and then shipping these people who are being, discriminated against into this country. Makes no rational sense. But the second reason was also clear. Britain in particular wanted to create a Western inclined nation in the heart of the Muslim world, originally to protect shipping routes. America similarly followed on by claiming their support was for strategic reasons to have this effective aircraft carrier in the Middle East to police and subdue other Muslim countries and to keep the Muslim world divided. What I'm explaining is that the knife in the back was clearly implemented by Britain and other countries for their own racist and geopolitical interests. But they don't even acknowledge this. They don't acknowledge their original crimes. They don't acknowledge that the fundamental reality of what Zionism was, a colonial project. This claim now that they'll recognize the territory as Palestine is like taking the knife out 6 inches after it was plunged into the back 9 inches. That's not something to celebrate or get excited about. And just as Brother Malcolm said, it isn't even taking out 6 inches. It's a proclamation on paper. Britain lost its empire. Britain has fundamentally lost its standing in the world. Its statement carries no or little to no weight on the ground. It will not change the reality of the occupation. A Palestinian state is seen as a dead solution, not only by America, the world's only superpower, but also by Israel itself. Just last week, Netanyahu expanded Zionist settlements into the West Bank, and in response to Britain, Canada and Australia recognizing Palestine, made this statement.
יש לי מסר ברור לאותם מנהיגים שמכירים במדינה פלסטינית לאחר הטבח הנורא ב7 באוקטובר. אתם מעניקים פרס עצום לטרור. ויש לי מסר נוסף עבורכם. זה לא יהיה. לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית ממערב לירדן.
And he's made similar statements just last week or the week before, where he greenlit more Zionist colonial settlements to take place in the West Bank. And also just note how he calls it Judea and Samaria and not the West Bank. And Ben Shapiro, that famous Zionist pro-Israel American, that's American with a small little a because he's more Israel than American, we all can see that. He praised American Congresswoman Claudia Tenney alongside Senator Tom Cotton for proposing a bill to change the name from West Bank to Judea and Samaria.
And the notion of calling it by its historic actual name and its current name, Judea and Samaria, makes an awful lot of sense. He's introducing legislation to that effect. According to Cotton, the bill would require the use of historically accurate terminology and align U.S. policy language with the geographical and cultural significance of the region. He says the Jewish people's legal and historic rights to Judea and Samaria go back thousands of years. The U.S. should stop using the politically charged term West Bank to refer to the biblical heartland of Israel. The Israeli people have an undeniable and indisputable historical and legal claim over Judea and Samaria. At this critical moment in history, the United States must reaffirm this, says Congresswoman Claudia Tenney from New York. She says this bill reaffirms Israel's rightful claim to its territory. I remain committed to defending the integrity of the Jewish state and fully supporting Israel's sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. That is a proper response given the fact there will not be a Palestinian state.
To basically implicitly recognize it's Israel's property, Israel's land. This also comes after Trump's first term in office, who moved US embassy from Tel Aviv, the official capital, so-called the capital of Israel, to Jerusalem, the capital that they see as actually the real capital of Israel. Thus, officially recognizing what Israel believes is the case, that Jerusalem, the whole of it, belongs to the Jews. There is no Palestinian state. The reality is the Western world conspiring with Israel have killed the idea of a two-state solution. They only use it to kick the can down the road, to give more time and give this impression that they have a solution, when in reality they have no will or desire to actually implement this solution. They've allowed Israel to increase colonialism in the West Bank. There's now over 700,000 Jews living there. They've turned a blind eye to Israel's erecting walls of separation within the West Bank, within so-called Palestinian occupied territory. They've allowed water, electricity, and vital infrastructure, even in the West Bank, to be controlled by the Zionists. The West have allowed this. The West have aided the destruction of a people in Gaza. Literally, Gaza is now unlivable, while the Zionists were supplied the arms and bombs by the West to make Gaza unlivable for the Palestinians. Britain, Europe, and America have aided the destruction of the idea of the Palestinian state, all the while giving these meek proclamations about a potential two-state solution. Britain's support for the Palestinian state may be a PR problem for Israel, but they know, Britain knows, America knows that it's never really going to happen. You can't establish a viable, independent, sovereign state when your water, electricity, land borders, airspace, economy is controlled by Israel. Not to mention that they have their own foreign settlements in your so-called Palestinian state, or that they establish apartheid walls to separate communities and control Palestinian movements. And this goes back to what Brother Malcolm had said. They don't even recognize the knife in the back of the Muslims, let alone be able to pull it out just a few inches. The knife is a Zionist entity built on ethnic cleansing and murder, continued violation of international law, bombing of several Muslim countries. You can't heal the Middle East while you're allowing this knife to remain in your back. You can't create peace and justice while believing an ethno-racial Jewish supremacist state should exist in the heart of the Muslim world. You're not going to heal the Middle East when you have an entity that bombs and attacks other Muslim countries like Syria, like Lebanon, like others, in pursuit of the Greater Israel Project, an expansionist project. You have to recognize that the Zionist project is a failed project. Just logically, an expansionist, aggressive, ethno-supremacist state will never exist in the Muslim world for the long term, amongst populations who simply hate the existence of this state, and not because they are Jews, but because they've seen for decades the war and instability caused by this Zionist project. When the Muslim world unites, this colonial entity will just no longer exist. It exists currently only because of American, Western military and economic support, and while the Muslim world remain divided by Western-installed regimes that slavishly bend over to Israel. Western support and division of Muslim lands is the only reason for this continued existence. If that gets reversed, when that inshallah will get reversed, then this brutal, oppressive Zionist entity, which is now being exposed to the world in terms of its brutality, will end. And even now, currently, we're seeing that the Zionist entity, even in the West, is losing support. I'm not talking about the support from the leaders, but the populations of these countries, whether that's Britain or America or France or Spain or Germany, the populations are shifting away. The majority of whom in the UK now have more affinity for the Palestinians than they do for Israel. Even in America, amongst young Republicans, the majority no longer give this blind allegiance to Israel anymore. And that's a problem for Israel, this entity that exists because it's propped up by Western states. It's no longer being seen as an ally, but many politicians now see them as a liability for these Western states who are now being exposed for the world to see how they're supporting this genocide and this genocidal regime. If Britain wants to remedy the wrongs, firstly, they have to recognize what Israel is and what they created in the first place, recognize the knife that they wielded, and recognize that its existence, its colonial project, is simply unsustainable. And this comes back to what the Muslim world needs to think about. The Muslim world needs to not only recognize what knife was wielded against them, but also recognize that the Palestinian state, or a recognition of a Palestinian state, is not a celebration, is not a victory. The victory is when the original historic wrongs are righted, when the justice is established and people are allowed to return back to their homes that they were expelled from, that they were ethnically cleansed from, not just in 67, but also from 1948, that they have to recognize that while this Zionist entity exists within the Muslim world, there will be cause for instability and also cause for, wars and other issues with regards to the Muslim world. It has to be reversed. That's the only option available for the Muslims. Otherwise, Israel and the Zionist entity will continue to bomb countries, whether that's Tunisia, Qatar, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, or where else that they want to bomb, and given all full support. This has to be reversed, and the best way to reverse this is to establish unity amongst the Muslim nations and liberate the whole of the land, like it was liberated in the past, whether that was under Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi rahimahullah or under Umar bin al-Khattab radiallahu anh, who opened the land and actually allowed Jews to come back, where Jews, Christians and Muslims lived under peace.